The 2022 F1 season has been a season with ups and downs, quite literally. Almost every car on track suffered from porpoising somewhere during the season. Everyone was quick to notice that this phenomenon had to be removed from the sport quickly, as it was deemed dangerous. So to prevent this from happening, the FIA introduced new regulations, and guess what? These regulations will bring new issues for the 2023 cars in terms of aero developments. Today we'll uncover which new problems we can expect on the cars, and how the teams will probably tackle them. The new modifications to Formula 1 regulations for 2023 are all about limiting the risk for porpoising and managing the vertical oscillations that caused such havoc for the drivers last year. The key difference is that the floor borders have been raised by 15mm, but this will have a wider influence on car design as teams re-optimize around such a large alteration. The modification affects about 1 meter in front of the rear tyre. As part of this alteration, the lowest portion of the underfloor tunnels has been elevated by 10mm. If you simply applied these adjustments to last year's car, they would lessen both the underfloor's downforce and its sensitivity to ground clearance. This would clearly have an effect on lowering the porpoising. According to the FIA's Nicholas Tombazis, this will cost around half a second, but that is before 500-odd engineers scattered throughout the teams began re-optimization and development of that region. So we probably won't even notice the changes when looking at lap times. But without these regulations, the cars would have probably been a bit faster than last year's cars. Plus, all these changes will be costly, leaving the teams no choice to further spend money of their cap on regulated changes. To combat these regulated changes, there will be aesthetic adjustments to the sidepods, as each team tries to figure out what design is the best. However, the aesthetic aspect is not often the main performance driver. It is frequently the elements that are difficult to see, which is essentially true with these ground effect cars and their strong underfloors. Because the back half of the floor side has been increased, you'll have to work harder on the front corner of the floor. This implies that the leading edge height of the floor, as well as the placement and curve of the 4 turning vanes visible only from the front, will have a far greater impact on the performance of that area, and hence the entire underfloor assembly. To make this section of floor work harder, turn more of the inlet flow outwards. This reduces the pressure underneath that part of the underfloor, and the outwash flow created by those tuning vanes reduces the pressure at the underfloor's margins farther backward, where the sides have been elevated by 15mm. It also implies that the diffuser will draw more of its flow from closer to the center of the floor's leading edge, and thus from further away from the outside world at the underfloor's outer margins. The space between the front wheels and the leading edge of the underfloor is another strategic point. Managing the turbulence caused by open-wheel cars is crucial to the underfloor's performance. Teams did this under the pre-2022 standards, using extremely complicated bargeboard setups, but they're now prohibited under the new rules. However, this does not prevent aerodynamicists from using the same concept in a new methodology. You can't just shift the front wheels forward away from the side pod outer corner with the maximum wheelbase set at 3.6 meters. Last year, most teams were at or near that limit, with only Alfa Romeo opting for a shorter car. A shorter car has advantages, as most teams failed to meet the weight requirement. The weight-to-length ratio varies depending on the car, but taking the 796 kg minimum weight in 2023 and the 3.6-meter wheelbase gives you a weight-to-length ratio of 2.21 kg per centimeters. That implies it's worth looking at the downforce loss of a little shorter car. If you are overweight, 5 centimeters shorter might save you up to 11 kilograms, or around 0.3 of a second every lap. That's probably comparable to 25 to 30 kilograms of zero drag downforce at 250 kilometers an hour, which is not something the engineers would prefer to overlook. Making the right trade-off early in the design specification is critical. In this case, somewhere halfway last season, probably right after the directive announcement. Another thing to keep in mind is that weight distribution isn't as quite forward as just removing some weight. This is specified quite precisely in the regulations. Here is the whole regulation for 2023. 4.1 Minimum mass. The mass of the car without fuel must not be always less than 796 kilograms during the competition. 4.2 Mass distribution. With the car resting on a horizontal plane, the mass measured at the front and rear axles must not be less than the mass specified in Article 4.1, always factored by 0.445 and 0.540 respectively, during the qualifying practice session. Rounding will be to the nearest 0.5 kilograms. Using such axle minimum weights, the weight distribution may be adjusted between 44.5% and 46% front load. One of the problems is to maintain this as steady as possible between full and empty fuel tanks, or at the very least, to ensure that it goes in the direction that provides the best and most consistent balance with varied fuel loads. This weight distribution shift is a major reason in cars doing well in qualifying, but not so well in race circumstances. In qualifying, you would normally run higher front wing load, or front center of aerodynamic pressure, to assist get the front tires running. Then during the race, you'd lower that front wing angle to preserve the back tires for a longer period. However, if the weight distribution shifts in the other way, i.e. rearward when gasoline is supplied, it will disrupt the mechanical balance of the car, requiring you to lower the front wing load further to prevent tire degradation. So, to get the most out of a somewhat shorter wheelbase, a solution to shifting the front corner of the sidepod farther backward to open that gap to the front tire will be high on the priority research list. But they must keep everything in check. Shortening the car or just removing some weight won't cut it. There are other components to take into consideration before making such big changes. Because of the position of the side impact structures, this is not a simple task. Mercedes discovered a creative solution by putting the higher forward component in a fairing that also acted as the rear view mirror mounting, demonstrating that if there's a will, there is usually a means to do something unusual. You just must ensure that you fully comply with the requirements, as well as the regulations meaning. The region between the two side impact structures is represented by the undercut on the front corner of the sidepod on all the cars, but notably the Red Bull and the Ferrari. Mercedes didn't have this undercut. Instead, it featured a tall triangular radiator intake near to the chassis side. This, in combined with the innovative position of the forward upper side impact structure, allowed Mercedes to have the largest gap to the front tire. However, the performance did not support this theory. Enabling spillage when the radiator can't flow as much air as is offered to it by being linked to the underfloor's leading edge isn't the best of solutions. When you have high pressure on the radiator intake and low pressure under the floor, there is only one method for the high pressure to escape. That's directly under the car, decreasing the underfloor's performance, which would take all the hard work on the floor away in a matter of seconds, and that could cost you months of research and precious wind tunnel time. If you can build a body profile that keeps that leakage away from the low pressure beneath the car, like Red Bull and Ferrari did, then the underfloor performance will be more constant. Which also means that you can build further on the most important part of these cars, the floor and underfloor. Not doing this and allowing the flow to exist will cause the underfloor to work inconsistently. The undercut permits this flow to travel down the sides of the car without interfering with the primary flow structure. It also implies a significant portion of the sidepod surface is located further away from the front tire. The Red Bull was the deepest if you merely took the undercut profile and drew a section line through this spot. The Ferrari, on the other hand, had a far more aggressive trailing edge. This curvature, together with the flow created by the vertical spinning vanes under the floor, should aid in the sealing of the floor as it moves backwards. So, this area, the front and back of the underfloor, will probably see the most variations. There will undoubtedly be several variations to try by each team during testing, but the regulation changes mean that the engineers had to think outside of the box to keep improving on their flaws. Let's see what the new cars bring us when they finally materialize. It's conceivable that we won't get the entire picture until the final day of the Bahrain test, or perhaps the first day of the first race weekend, because the teams will want to keep their latest ideas hidden until the last minute. And even if they were to bring the full package, they would be sandbagging anyway to try and deceive their competitors. What are your thoughts? Will the car look entirely different due to these regulation changes? And will they bring new problems for this season? Let us know your thoughts in the comments down below. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.